and got away with it quite lightly. But I've had it, and I can so understand what other people have gone through.
The British monarchy is built on centuries of unbreakable tradition. But what happens when the next generation dares to shatter it? Behind Buckingham Palace's glittering facade, a confrontation unfolded so explosive, it forced ancient secrets into the brutal light of day. King Charles, known for his careful image and steady hand, found himself cornered not by a rival monarch or politician, but by a boy who carries royal blood and a silent, searing accusation. Archie, barely old, enough to understand the rules written long before his birth, became the symbol of a battle that even the crown couldn't silence. This wasn't just a private family quarrel. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And when the king finally confronted Prince Archie, the truth it exposed wasn't just bad. It was devastating. The world saw a smiling king, waving to crowds, steady in his role as the face of continuity. But behind those closed palace doors, a storm was brewing. And at its turbulent center stood a child who had no idea of the forces swirling around him. Archie, the grandson of King Charles, was born into privilege, or so it seemed. In reality, his very existence tore open old wounds the monarchy had spent decades trying to bury. The confrontation between King Charles and Prince Archie wasn't supposed to happen, at least not in a way that the world would ever hear about. Royal confrontations are supposed to stay whispered behind silk curtains. But this time, the anger spilled over, and the cracks in the House of Windsor could no longer be hidden. What began as a quiet dispute over titles erupted into a full-blown controversy that shook the palace to its foundation. Archie, too young to speak for himself, became a symbol of division, a mirror reflecting uncomfortable truths the royal family didn't want the world to see. The question of whether he would be granted a royal title seemed, on the surface, a matter of protocol. Yet, beneath the surface, the issue exposed fractures that went far deeper than any formal title could cover. The monarchy prided itself on tradition, stability, and unity. But now, for the first time in generations, those ideals were being openly questioned. Was Archie's exclusion from royal titles a mere technicality, a decision based on dusty old rules? Or was it a deliberate move, rooted in fear, prejudice, and a desperate attempt to preserve an image that was already crumbling? As King Charles grappled with the storm he helped create, the world outside the palace began to ask questions the royals had no easy answers for. Questions about belonging, identity, and whether the crown still stood for all who bore its blood. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. It had become a global reckoning, one that no carefully worded palace statement could contain. But to understand the weight of that confrontation, we must first go back to where it all began, the moment Archie entered the world under a shadow of uncertainty. From the very beginning, Archie's arrival broke all royal traditions, and the palace could no longer control the narrative. On May 6, 2019, the world waited with breathless anticipation for the grand announcement of the newest royal heir. But instead of the usual fanfare, something strange unfolded. There were no immediate crowds gathered outside the hospital, no grand photo call on the hospital steps, no proud parents waving to a sea of flashing cameras. Instead, there was silence. A silence that grew louder with every passing hour. As the media scrambled for answers, Buckingham Palace issued a brief, clinical statement. Meghan Markle had gone into labor. Yet, by the time this was announced, Archie had already been born. The timelines didn't match. The delay wasn't just odd, it was unprecedented, and it sent shockwaves through the very foundation of royal tradition. The confusion only deepened when Archie's birth certificate surfaced. People combed through every detail, desperate to understand the break from protocol. And what they found raised even more questions. Prince Harry, known worldwide by that very title, wasn't listed as Prince at all. Instead, the certificate simply called him His Royal Highness Henry Charles Albert David, Duke of Sussex. Meghan's listing was even more startling. Despite being widely referred to as the Duchess of Sussex since her wedding, the certificate identified her as Princess of the United Kingdom. a title she had rarely, if ever, used publicly. It was a detail so peculiar, so glaringly out of step with how royal births were traditionally recorded, that even seasoned royal watchers were left stunned. Was this merely a paperwork anomaly, or a subtle but deliberate signal that Archie's place within the monarchy was already being treated differently? The public wasn't satisfied with vague explanations. Whispers grew into a roar as speculation spread across headlines and living rooms alike. Was the royal family protecting Archie's privacy, shielding him from the brutal media circus that had haunted Harry's childhood? Or was something much deeper at play, an intentional distancing of Archie from his royal heritage, orchestrated not by concerned parents, but by the institution itself? The absence of ceremony, the inconsistencies in official documents, and the guarded responses from Buckingham Palace all pointed to one chilling possibility. Archie was being set apart from the beginning, marked by silence where there should have been celebration. As days turned into weeks, it became clear that this wasn't a mere departure from tradition. It was a fracture in the palace's carefully managed image, a crack that no statement could plaster over. Archie's birth, instead of symbolizing the future unity and modernity of the monarchy, had exposed uncomfortable truths the royal family could no longer bury. And it wouldn't be long before the world realized Archie's treatment wasn't just different, it was deliberate. A title withheld, a legacy questioned, and a confrontation that would change royal history forever. For the British monarchy, titles have never been mere words. They are lifelines to the crown, symbols of belonging, of status, of unbroken tradition. But when Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor entered the world, that chain was deliberately broken. According to the decree issued by King George V in 1917, only the children and grandchildren of the sovereign were automatically entitled to the style of prince or princess. Under this rule, Archie, as the great-grandson of Queen Elizabeth II, was technically outside the automatic line of entitlement. At least, that was the story the palace was willing to tell, but history has a way of revealing its cracks. Because in 2012, a full 7 years before Archie's birth, Queen Elizabeth II herself had issued a personal declaration ensuring that all of Prince William's children would carry royal titles, regardless of gender or birth order. George, Charlotte, and Louis were all welcomed into the world with the golden seal of royal legitimacy. No delays, no questions, no controversy. The rules, it seemed, could be bent when the future king's heirs were involved, which begged an uncomfortable question. Why wasn't Archie afforded the same honor? The answer, it appeared, was far more sinister than ancient protocols. Whispers quickly turned to accusations. Was it racial bias, cloaked behind the veil of tradition? Meghan Markle, the first biracial member of the modern royal family, had already faced a relentless wave of media scrutiny. Now, there were growing suspicions that her son was being quietly pushed to the margins of royal life, not because of outdated rules, but because of who his mother was. The tension, once hidden, finally erupted into public view during Meghan and Harry's shocking interview with Oprah Winfrey. Meghan's voice trembled as she recalled private palace conversations that no mother should ever have to endure discussions not about Archie's role or character, but about the color of his skin. They spoke of concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born. Words so casual, yet so devastating. Words that stripped away the illusion of royal impartiality in one brutal stroke. Public outrage exploded across the world. What had been dismissed as bureaucracy was now seen for what it truly was, a selective enforcement of tradition that masked a deeper, more painful prejudice. The monarchy's spotless image, carefully crafted over decades, was suddenly drenched in scandal and doubt. Behind the glittering crowns and grand ceremonies, an ugly truth had emerged, and no amount of royal pageantry could silence the questions it raised. But beyond titles and traditions, it was personal, and it would soon explode in a way the palace could no longer contain. When a father stands against a king, only one thing can follow a battle that shakes the crown itself. In the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace, behind ancient walls heavy with history, an emotional storm was gathering. Prince Harry, once the beloved son who walked solemnly behind his mother's coffin and carried the hopes of a grieving nation, now stood face to face with the sovereign, his own father. But this wasn't a confrontation about duty, or honor, or even tradition. This was about something far deeper. This was about his son, about fairness, about a future Archie had been denied before he even had a chance to claim it. Harry's voice, usually measured and respectful, broke with urgency as he pleaded for his child's right to belong. He wasn't asking for privilege. He wasn't demanding grandeur. He was fighting for something more fundamental: recognition, equality, a place for Archie in a family that seemed determined to shut the door before he could even knock. For Harry, the weight of history, the burden of royal blood, had always been a double-edged sword. But now that sword was pointed at his own child, and he refused to stand silent. The meeting between Harry and King Charles was supposed to be private. It was supposed to stay within the gilded walls of the monarchy's fortress. But emotions do not obey protocol. What began as a tense conversation spiraled quickly into a heated argument. Harry accused the monarchy of playing favorites, of hiding behind ancient rules when it suited them, and bending them without hesitation when it didn't. How, he demanded, could they justify excluding Archie while making exceptions for others? Was fairness truly dead within the House of Windsor? King Charles, burdened by his own battles for acceptance and stability, pushed back. He spoke of modernizing the monarchy, of slimming down its ranks to protect its future. In his eyes, a smaller, more streamlined royal family was essential to survival in a changing world. But to Harry, those words rang hollow. Practicality, cost-cutting, restructuring, these were the excuses of a system that had always found ways to justify exclusion when it suited their image. And now, the cost of that image was being paid by an innocent child. The confrontation left both men shaken. There were no winners, no moments of compromise, no easy understanding. Because this wasn't just a clash of opinions. It was a clash of visions, one rooted in tradition, the other crying out for change. Harry's fight for Archie wasn't just about a title. It was about validation, about demanding that his son be seen, accepted, and honored for who he was, not hidden away because of who his mother was or what the monarchy feared he represented. But Harry wasn't just fighting for Archie. He was challenging centuries of royal rules that refused to change. Families break quietly, until one moment rips the silence apart forever. In the aftermath of that devastating confrontation between father and son, the fracture within the House of Windsor could no longer be hidden. Harry had not merely challenged the system. He had exposed the vulnerability at its heart, and the damage spread faster than anyone at the palace could contain. His relationship with King Charles, once marked by deep admiration and complicated love, now hung by a thread. Every conversation became a negotiation, every public appearance a delicate charade. Trust, once frayed, now felt irreparable. But the loss didn't end there. In the shadow of this conflict, another bond, the one, between brothers began to crumble. Harry and William, who once leaned on each other through the darkest hours of their lives, now stood on opposite sides of a battlefield neither had wanted, but both had helped create. William, bound tightly to duty and tradition, struggled to understand Harry's rebellion. Harry, desperate for autonomy and fairness, saw in William a brother too willing to protect an institution that refused to protect its own. Silent dinners, missed calls, avoided glances. What had been a fortress of brotherhood slowly collapsed into a wall of resentment and unspoken words. As the world watched from a distance, Buckingham Palace clung desperately to its silence. Official statements were polished and hollow, offering little more than vague denials and tired appeals for privacy. But the very absence of a real response became its own kind of confession. The void filled with speculation, suspicion, and public outrage. Every unanswered question only deepened the wounds. And at the center of this maelstrom stood Archie, too young to understand the forces swirling around him, yet powerful enough to embody the entire battle. His name became a symbol not just of a boy denied a title, but of an institution unwilling to confront its own reflection. The monarchy had survived wars, scandals, and abdications. Yet now, with a single child's uncertain place in the family, it faced an existential threat unlike any before. Archie's treatment was no longer about the intricacies of royal law or bloodlines. It was about the soul of the monarchy itself, about whether tradition could evolve to embrace all it touched, or whether it would wither under the weight of its own refusal to change. The silence was deafening, but it would not last, because the next voice that rose would break through it, like a thunderclap. And then, Meghan spoke, and the palace could no longer control the flood that followed. One interview, one revelation, and the world would never see the royal family the same way again. In March 2021, Meghan Markle sat across from Oprah Winfrey under the warm Californian sun. But the words that followed would cast a shadow over Buckingham Palace that no amount of tradition could ever dispel. With each answer, Meghan tore apart the carefully woven myths that had protected the monarchy for centuries. This was no polite conversation. It was an unflinching exposé of what had been whispered about in corridors, speculated about in headlines, but never confirmed until now. With steady breath and a voice that masked years of pain, Meghan revealed the conversations that had taken place behind palace doors. Conversations not about Archie's future achievements, not about how to welcome him into the royal fold, but about the color of his skin. It wasn't just idle curiosity. It was fear. Fear that the bloodline, so fiercely protected for generations, would be altered by the mere shade of a child's complexion. And the heartbreak didn't end there. Meghan disclosed that even the rules themselves, the sacred laws supposedly binding, the monarchy's every move, had been twisted in the shadows. According to her, efforts were made to ensure that Archie would never be given the title of prince, not merely delayed, but permanently denied. The shockwaves were immediate and seismic. Around the world, television screens flickered with disbelief. Newspapers erupted with headlines of scandal, and social media became a battleground of fury and disbelief. For millions, the image of a benevolent, impartial royal family shattered overnight. And for others, it confirmed the darkest suspicions that tradition had long masked prejudice. In a single interview, the crown's global image shifted from one of stoic endurance to one of wounded credibility, its luster dulled by revelations it could no longer control. Meghan's portrayal of life inside the palace was one of exclusion, of isolation so severe it left her contemplating an escape far more permanent than moving across the Atlantic. She spoke of reaching out for help and being told it would not be good for the institution. The silence from the palace in response was just as damning as the allegations themselves. Instead of clarity or compassion, there was only the cold, calculated distance that royal watchers had come to recognize. No denials, no apologies, just a refusal to engage, hoping that centuries of mystique would smother the flames. But the flames only grew higher. Meghan and Harry's interview was no longer just about two individuals at odds with their family. It had become a worldwide referendum on the values the monarchy claimed to uphold. And as the storm raged outside the palace walls, a quieter, more devastating decision was being made inside. After months of silence, King Charles made his move, but it came at a heartbreaking cost. In 2022, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the monarchy found itself standing at a crossroads. The new king, facing pressure both from within the palace and the roaring world outside it, had a choice to make. For Archie and Lilibet, titles that once seemed unreachable were now, by every traditional rule, their birthright. And yet, weeks passed, then months. There was no royal decree, no public acknowledgement, no proud announcement from Buckingham Palace. The hesitation spoke louder than any proclamation ever could. When the titles were finally granted, it wasn't with the joyous celebration that usually accompanied such honors. It was quiet, reluctant, mechanical. A move made not from the heart, but from the cold necessity of royal survival. Rumors swirled that the decision was forced, that global scrutiny had left the monarchy with no alternative but to comply. For many, it was too little, too late. The damage had already been done. The deep scars left by months, even years, of exclusion and doubt could not be erased with a simple change of titles on official documents. To the public, the gesture reeked of political calculation. It wasn't a triumph. It was an admission of a wound too deep to heal with ceremony alone. By the time Archie and Lilibet were styled as prince and princess, the emotional distance between Harry's family and the crown had stretched into a chasm. The titles may have been restored, but the trust, the belonging, the unity, all were broken beyond easy repair. The bitter irony was impossible to ignore. The monarchy, in giving what should have been a natural birthright, only reinforced how deliberately it had once withheld it. For Archie, the future now stood clouded by contradiction. Royal by name, but perhaps not in spirit. Tied to a lineage stretching back centuries, yet growing up oceans away from the palaces and traditions his bloodline was meant to inherit, what place would he carve for himself in a world that had both crowned him and cast him aside? Would he wear his title proudly, or would it hang around his neck like a relic of a family battle he never asked to fight? The titles had been granted, yes, but the echoes of rejection lingered, haunting every royal ceremony, every distant wave to the crowds. Archie's legacy would not be defined by a document or a decree. It would be forged in the quiet struggles, ahead, caught between two worlds, neither of which he fully chose. But even with titles restored, the wounds of rejection still bleed, and Archie's future remains trapped between two worlds, royal by blood, outsider by fate. Prince Archie's story is only just beginning. Far from the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace, Archie is growing up under the California sun, surrounded not by royal protocol, but by freedom. No morning drills, no press appearances arranged by palace handlers. His world is filled with the quiet hum of a normal childhood, a privilege his father and grandmother never truly had. Yet within him, stitched into his very being, lives the legacy of a crown he did not choose, and a battle fought in his name before he could even speak. As Archie and Lilibet grow older, the questions will inevitably come. Will they feel the pull of royal history, the invisible chain linking them to kings, queens, and centuries of bloodlines? Or will they carve their own futures, untethered by the expectations of a world they were born into but never truly welcomed? By the monarchy they are tied to, by name if not by spirit, stands as a distant echo, one that may beckon or reject, depending on the winds of history. Their connection to that world, once fragile, has only frayed further as time and silence have widened the divide. Harry and Meghan's battle was never just about titles or formal recognition. It was about something far more human, about being seen, about being heard, about ensuring that their children would never be reduced to symbols of tradition or cast aside to protect an illusion of purity. They fought not for crowns or ceremonies, but for the right of their family to exist fully, proudly, without apology. And that fight, whether victorious or not, leaves deep scars, wounds that Archie will one day have to examine for himself. The question that now hangs over Archie's future is a profound one. Will he embrace his royal roots, using his heritage to create change within an institution that once struggled to accept him? Or will he walk away entirely, forging a path so distant from the House of Windsor that the connection fades into a footnote of history? His life holds the potential to redefine what it means to be royal in a world that demands more than tradition, it demands humanity. For now, Archie's story is still unwritten. His legacy is still being shaped, not by palace decrees or public expectations, but by the quiet, steady decisions made far from the glare of royal spotlights. He may one day step into history books, not as a prince molded by tradition, but as a young man who chose his own destiny. And whether he stands inside the gates of Buckingham Palace or far beyond them, his journey may yet change everything the monarchy thought it knew about blood, belonging, and revolution. Because sometimes, the true revolution doesn't come with a crown. It comes with a child refusing to wear it. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.